Most people watching this have goals. You have a to-do list, a vision, maybe even a 5-year plan. Yet, deep down, you still feel uneasy. Like one bad week could erase everything you are working for. You tell yourself you are moving forward, but your nervous system stays stuck in survival mode. Always alert, always waiting for something to go wrong. A 35-year-old with a clean career path still checks his email at night in fear of losing his job. A woman who writes affirmations in her journal every morning still feels a knot in her chest because stress never left her body. A guy who tracks every workout and posts his fitness goals online still looks the same months later. Because talking about change is not the same as becoming different. This is the hidden pain of modern ambition. You look busy, you look driven, but inside you feel fragile. The uncomfortable truth is simple. If your goals were really giving you strength, you would not feel this anxious. Because real power feels stable, not shaky. Goals push your mind into the future, but life keeps hitting you in the present. And when reality does not cooperate, all that hope turns into self-doubt. You are not weak. You are just building your sense of worth on things you cannot control. And that is why you never feel safe. Stay with me, because the next part explains why this keeps happening and how to stop it. And before we go there, write one word in the comments that describes how this hit you. Maybe tired, maybe stuck, maybe numb. When you name it, you start to see it. And when you see it, you can finally change it. The reason you feel so unstable, even with goals, like we talked about in the last part, is not because you lack ambition. It is because you were taught to chase the future instead of building power in the present. And this is exactly where Machiavelli comes in. Niccolo Machiavelli was not a philosopher who sat around talking about ideals. He was a man who watched cities fall, leaders get betrayed, and entire lives destroyed by one wrong move. So he learned to see reality the way it actually works. He did not teach people how to feel hopeful. He taught them how to stay alive and how to win when everything is stacked against them. To Machiavelli, the world was not fair and it was not stable. It was a battlefield of shifting alliances, hidden motives, and constant pressure. And anyone who relied on dreams instead of strategy was already defeated. That is why his ideas still feel sharp today, because they do not comfort you, they prepare you. This video is not here to help you imagine a better version of your life someday. It is here to make you solid enough that you stop being shaken by every setback, delay, or disappointment. You are not going to learn how to want more. You are going to learn how to need less. Because when you need less, you cannot be controlled. You will begin to understand how to stop tying your sense of worth to outcomes you cannot control. So when plans fail, you do not fall apart. You simply adjust and keep moving. This shift is what creates real inner strength, the kind that does not depend on praise, timing, or luck. Think about two people who both lose their job. One panics and feels worthless. The other feels focused and ready to move. The event is the same, but the inner structure is completely different. Machiavelli shows you how to build that structure so your life is no longer held hostage by the future. And in the next part, you will see why the very thing you thought was helping you, your goals, is actually what has been quietly keeping you weak. Because of what you just heard about Machiavelli and power, it becomes easier to see why goals quietly weaken you instead of strengthening you. Because the moment you attach your identity to a future result, you step into a permanent state of waiting. And waiting always feels like lack. When you say, "I will be confident when I get promoted," or "I will feel worthy when I find a relationship," or "I will finally relax when I make enough money," you have just told your nervous system that right now you are not enough. And that creates a low-level anxiety that never turns off. A man who wants a promotion does not simply work harder, He starts walking on eggshells. He overthinks every email. He reads into every tone, because his sense of value is now hanging on one decision he cannot control. A woman who wants a relationship does not just date. She feels a quiet hunger in every interaction. She wonders what is wrong with her. She measures herself against other people. And even when she is with someone, she is afraid of losing them, because her worth is tied to being chosen. A guy who wants to be rich does not just build skills. He feels constant pressure. Every expense feels like a mistake. Every slow month feels like failure, because his future income has become his current identity. In all three cases, the goal does not give direction. It creates a vacuum, and the mind hates a vacuum, so it fills it with fear, comparison, and self-doubt. This is why people with big dreams are often the most stressed, because they live emotionally in a future that has not arrived yet, and the present never feels good enough to stand on. The philosophy is simple but uncomfortable. When your sense of worth lives in tomorrow, today feels like something to escape, not something to build on. That is why goals make you fragile. Because every delay, every rejection, every obstacle feels like a verdict on who you are, not just on what you are trying to do. Machiavelli understood that power comes from being rooted in what you can control, not from begging the future to validate you. When you build your identity around results, you give away your emotional stability to forces you do not command. And that is the definition of weakness. Think about someone who loses a deal, or misses a target, or gets passed over. They do not just feel disappointed. They feel small, because their self-image was wired into that outcome. This is why so many people collapse after a setback. Not because the setback was huge, but because it took their identity with it. When you stop tying yourself to results, something strange happens. You still want things, but you no longer need them to feel solid, and that changes how you move through the world. You become calmer in negotiations, more patient in relationships, and more focused in work, because you are no longer trying to prove that you deserve to exist. This is the bridge from the Machiavellian lens you just learned to what comes next. Because once you see how goals create emotional hunger, you can start to understand why so many people chase them even when they are hurting. And in the next part, you will see how goals are not really plans at all. They are psychological painkillers. That idea from the last part, that goals create emotional hunger, leads straight into something even more uncomfortable. Most people do not set goals because they are strong. They set goals because they are hurting. When you hate your job, you do not change the structure of your work. You tell yourself one day, I will quit and everything will be better. When you hate your body, you do not fix the habits that shape it. You cling to a number on the scale and imagine a future version of yourself who is finally accepted. When you hate your life, you do not deal with the emptiness you feel every morning. You invent a dream where all of it magically disappears. In that moment, the goal becomes a drug, not a strategy, because it gives you a hit of relief without forcing you to touch the real problem. You feel calmer just by writing it down, just by saying it out loud, just by believing that something will save you later. And that calm tricks you into thinking you are making progress. But nothing actually changes. The job still drains you. The body still reflects the same habits. The life still feels hollow, and the pain keeps leaking through the cracks. This is why goals are so seductive. They do not require courage, they require imagination. And imagination is always easier than action. The philosophy here is simple and sharp. A goal does not heal the wound, it only numbs it. It tells you everything will be okay, without ever asking why it is not okay now. The next part will show you how this quiet self-deception has been controlling you for years. And And before we go there, write one word in the comments that describes what you have been using your goals to escape from. Maybe work, maybe body, maybe life. Because naming the pain is the first step to taking back your power. Think about someone who talks non-stop about quitting their job but never builds the skills to leave. Or someone who keeps planning a fitness transformation while still eating the same way every night. The goal becomes a story they tell themselves so they do not have to face their own patterns. Machiavelli would have called this weakness, not as an insult, but as a diagnosis. Because when you rely on fantasies to survive the present, you give up the chance to change it. Real strength begins when you stop asking the future to rescue you and start dealing with what is actually bleeding right now. And that shift is where everything you thought about goals begins to collapse. What you just saw about goals being emotional painkillers explains why talking about them feels so good. Because the moment you tell someone what you are going to do, your brain releases a small hit of dopamine as if the thing already happened. And that chemical reward steals the hunger you actually need to do the work. This is why so many people announce a new chapter before they ever write a single page. A guy posts "starting my business" on social media, gets likes and encouragement, and then quietly never launches anything because his nervous system already felt the reward. A woman tells everyone she is getting serious about the gym, buys new clothes, shares workout selfies. But months later, her body has not changed because she spent the energy on being seen instead of becoming different. Words are cheap, but they feel powerful. And that is exactly why they weaken you. Because you trade future action for present approval. At the same time, the moment you speak your goals out loud, you create social friction. People start to compare, judge, and project their own fears onto you. Some will doubt you, some will envy you, and some will quietly hope you fail so they do not have to question their own stagnation. Now, instead of just facing the work, you are also facing invisible resistance, and that drains even more of your focus. This is why Machiavelli warned against revealing your intentions too early, because in a competitive world, information is power, and leaking it makes you vulnerable. Silence creates weight. It makes your moves unpredictable. It lets you build in peace. While talking turns your plans into targets. There is also a quieter cost. Every time you explain what you're going to do, you split your attention. Part of you performs for the audience, and part of you tries to act. And that divided mind never moves with force. Think of someone who is always updating their friends about their new project versus someone who disappears for 6 months and comes back with results. The second person always looks more powerful, not because they are better, but because they conserve their energy. This connects back to what you learned about goals being a way to escape pain. Because when you talk about them, you get relief without progress, and that keeps you stuck in the same place. The philosophy is simple and ruthless. Silence builds gravity. Speech leaks power. And the more you broadcast who you want to be, the less pressure you feel to actually become it. If you want to change your life, stop narrating it. And in the next part, you will see how chaos and bad luck expose this weakness even more. Because when reality hits, only those who kept their power intact can adapt and survive. The danger of living by goals becomes obvious the moment life stops cooperating. Because the world does not negotiate with your plans, it moves on its own rhythm. And Machiavelli called this force fortuna, a current so wild that only fools believe they can control it. You can prepare for a job, a relationship, or a future for years, and one unexpected shift can erase all of it in a week. Not because you failed, but because reality changed the terrain. When that happens, people who built themselves around a single outcome feel like the ground vanished under their feet. while people who built themselves around their ability to move simply change direction and keep going. Picture a man who loses his job and sits in his apartment staring at the wall, replaying every decision, feeling like his identity was just taken away. Then picture another man who feels the same hit but starts calling contacts, researching industries, upgrading skills, and quietly steps into a better opportunity. Months later, the difference was never luck. It was structure. One man had a future he was attached to. The other had a system he could adapt with. Fortuna punishes rigidity and rewards those who can bend without breaking. Because chaos is not evil. It is just change without permission. When you depend on a fixed plan, that change feels like a personal attack. But when you depend on your own leverage, it feels like a door opening somewhere else. This is why Machiavelli saw uncertainty as something to be mastered rather than avoided. Because power does not come from knowing what will happen. It comes from being ready, no matter what happens. Weak people crave stability because it makes them feel safe. Strong people create stability inside themselves so the outside world cannot shake them. The philosophy is brutal but freeing. The weak fear disorder. The strong learn how to ride it. This flows naturally from what you learned about silence and power. Because when you stop leaking your energy into words and fantasies, you have more capacity to respond when reality hits. You no longer waste time mourning the old plan. You look at the new terrain and start positioning yourself again. And that habit alone is what separates those who get crushed by change from those who grow from it. In the next part, this same idea will turn inward, because if you cannot command yourself when things get hard, no strategy in the world will save you. The reason everything you just heard about chaos and adaptability matters is because none of it works if you cannot command yourself. And this is where most people quietly fail. Not because they lack information, but because they are too gentle with their own weaknesses. Modern culture tells you to love yourself, to be kind to your flaws, to forgive every lapse. And while that sounds healthy, it creates a person who never feels any pressure to change. Because comfort becomes more important than growth. Think about someone who keeps hitting the snooze button, promising they will start tomorrow. Or someone who says they will work out, save money, or build something meaningful, then breaks that promise and immediately excuses it. That person is not lacking motivation. They are lacking internal authority. When you never hold yourself accountable, you teach your mind that your words do not matter. And once your own voice loses weight, the world stops taking you seriously too. This is the quiet link between self-discipline and power. Respect starts inside. Machiavelli would have called this the law of the ruler. A leader who cannot control his own house will never control a city. And you are the ruler of your own mind. You do not become strong by pampering every impulse. You become strong by setting standards and enforcing them. A man who cannot say no to his cravings cannot say no to a bad deal. And a woman who cannot keep a promise to herself will struggle to demand respect from anyone else. This is why self-discipline is not punishment. It is protection. It keeps your future from being sabotaged by your present moods. When you start fearing the part of you that procrastinates, the part that settles, the part that looks for easy exits, something shifts. You stop negotiating with weakness and you start acting from principle. The philosophy is simple and ruthless. When you do not fear yourself, you will always fear the world because you know you are unreliable. But when you become your own hardest standard, external pressure loses its grip because you already live under a stronger law. If this hit a nerve, comment "ready," not for me, but for yourself. because that word is a line in the sand between who you have been and who you are about to become. This prepares you for what comes next, because once you have internal order, you can finally build something real. And the next part will show you the 3 pillars that replace fragile goals with actual power. Everything you have learned so far points to one simple truth. Goals fail because they are fragile, and what replaces them is not motivation, but a structure built on 3 pillars that hold no matter how the world moves: position, leverage, and adaptability. Position means you stop asking, "What do I want?" and start asking, "Where am I standing?" Because in every economy, there are places where money, influence, and information naturally flow. And if you are not in those currents, no amount of effort will carry you forward. A person working in a shrinking industry can grind for years and still fall behind, while someone who steps into a growing market can move ahead with the same energy, simply because of where they chose to stand. Leverage changes how much force your actions produce, because using only your own time is the slowest way to build anything. And people who understand power look for ways to multiply themselves through technology, networks, and systems. Think about a freelancer who trades hours for pay versus someone who builds a platform, a product, or a team. The second person creates results that keep coming, even when they are not present. Adaptability is what keeps you alive when those first 2 pillars are tested, because no market stays the same and no plan survives a contact with reality. So the ability to read signals, sense when something is shifting, and pivot before you get trapped is what separates survivors from casualties. This is why Machiavellian power is never rigid. It is fluid and alert, always ready to move when a door closes or a new one appears. When you operate with these 3 pillars, you no longer wake up asking, "What do I want to achieve this year?" You wake up asking, "Where am I positioned in the flow of money, power, and information today? And what can I do to improve that position?" Someone who works close to decision makers, understands emerging trends, and builds transferable skills can weather almost any storm, because their value is not locked into one outcome. This mindset removes desperation, because you are no longer betting everything on a single roll of the dice. You are stacking the odds in your favor every day. Position puts you in the game, leverage lets you play at a higher level, and adaptability keeps you there when conditions change. Together, they form a system that makes progress feel natural instead of forced. Because you are not pushing against the world, you are aligning yourself with how it actually moves. This is the bridge between discipline and identity. Because once you see life this way, goals start to feel small and narrow, while systems start to feel powerful and alive. And that is what prepares you for the final shift into a new way of seeing yourself. The real shift that happens after everything you have just heard is not something you can post or explain. It is something that settles quietly inside you, because you stop seeing yourself as someone who is waiting for life to finally begin. When you live by goals, you are always standing in the shadow of a future version of yourself, comparing who you are now to who you hope to become. And that comparison keeps you small no matter how ambitious you are. A system changes that completely. Instead of asking, "When will I arrive?" you start asking, "Where am I positioned and what can I influence right now?" And that simple question moves you out of fantasy and into control. Dreamers live in stories. They talk about what will happen. They imagine how things will feel, and they measure their worth by whether the story comes true. Controllers live in reality. They watch what is happening, they adjust, and they build leverage where it actually exists. This is why someone with a system walks into a room differently. They do not look like they are trying to prove something. They look like they already belong there. You do not need applause when you have options, and you do not need reassurance when you know how to move. The philosophy cuts straight through the noise. You do not need a perfect future to feel valuable. You need power in the present. Because power is what lets you choose, leave, negotiate, and protect your time. When you stop living for outcomes, you start living from structure, and structure gives you weight. This is where anxiety fades. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become harder to destabilize. The person who once needed a goal to feel hopeful now has a system that keeps them grounded, and that groundedness becomes their new identity. You no longer wake up asking, "What do I want to be?" You wake up asking, "What do I need to do to strengthen my position today?" And that mindset alone begins to compound. This is how you move from being someone who dreams about control to someone who quietly holds it. Nothing you heard here was meant to make you feel good. It was meant to make you see clearly. Because once you see how much of your life has been shaped by waiting, you cannot unsee it. Most people will go back to chasing goals, talking about the future and calling that progress. But the ones who understood will feel a quiet shift inside, a sense that something more solid just took its place. That shift is what real control feels like. Not excitement, not hype, but calm authority over your own direction. You no longer need the world to promise you anything when you know how to move within it. That is the difference between someone who hopes and someone who commands. If this message actually landed, you already know it, because your mind feels still instead of restless. Comment system to mark that moment, not for anyone else, but to lock it into yourself. And subscribe if you are ready to build a life that runs on structure instead of wishes, because what comes next is not about dreaming bigger. It is about becoming someone who does not have to dream to feel powerful.